In the long and bitter history of landlordism in Ireland, few names provoke such universal anger as that of the improbably named Hubert de Burgh-Canning, the Marquess of Clanricarde. Born into immense privilege and vast inherited wealth, the Marquess of Clanricarde became, by the end of his life, a symbol of everything that had gone wrong in the relationship between land, power, and people in 19th century Ireland. When he died in 1916, wealthy and alone, he was widely remembered by tenants, politicians, and even fellow aristocrats as the worst landlord Ireland had ever known. The Marquess of Clanricarde inherited more than 50,000 acres in County Galway, centred on Portumna and stretching across much of East Galway. These were not marginal holdings. They were productive agricultural lands, worked by thousands of tenant farmers whose families depended entirely on the soil for survival. He also inherited a substantial fortune through his maternal family from George Canning, the former British Prime Minister. Few men in Ireland possessed greater security or influence, yet few squandered it so completely. What defined the Marquess of Clanricarde more than anything else was his detachment. He was the archetypal absentee landlord. He lived in London, not in a grand country house, but in chambers at the Albany in Piccadilly. Despite his enormous wealth, contemporaries described him as reclusive and miserly. He dressed shabbily, lived alone, and hoarded jewels, manuscripts, and artworks that he rarely displayed. Wealth, to him, was something to be defended and accumulated, not shared or used to improve the lives of others. From these London rooms, he ruled his Galway estates at a distance. Evidence suggests he visited them only once after inheriting, returning briefly for his father's funeral in 1874. He never walked the fields, never spoke to his tenants, and never witnessed the conditions under which his rents were extracted. The land existed for him not as a living community, but as a legal abstraction, lines in an account book governed by the absolute rights of property. This attitude became catastrophic during the agricultural depression of the late 1870s and 1880s. Falling prices, poor harvests, and mounting arrears left tenant farmers across Ireland unable to meet rents fixed in more prosperous years. Many landlords, even cautious ones, recognized reality. They granted abatements or quietly reduced rents, fearing both humanitarian disaster and political unrest. The Marquess of Clanricarde refused. To him, any reduction was an unacceptable infringement on ownership itself. His tenants, encouraged by local clergy and land league organisers, decided to fight back. They began a campaign where they opposed evictions, pooled rents, and offering payment only at reduced rates. His response was uncompromising. There would be no negotiation. If rent was unpaid, eviction would follow. What followed on his estates was among the most notorious episodes of the land war. The evictions centred on Woodford became infamous throughout Ireland and beyond. Woodford was a small village in East Galway at the heart of the Clanricarde estate and one of the main flashpoints of the land war. Because the local population overwhelmingly supported the tenants, evictions there could only be carried out with massive state force. Entire communities resisted. Bailiffs could not act without armed protection. Hundreds of Royal Irish Constabulary officers and at times British soldiers were deployed to enforce eviction orders on behalf of a single man. Cottages were barricaded, doors were smashed in, families were put out onto the roadside under armed guard. Some evictions dragged on for days. The cost to the British taxpayer often exceeded the rent being recovered. The Marquess of Clanricarde remained unmoved, insisting that the law must be enforced regardless of human suffering or public expense. The tension on his estates turned deadly. In 1882, his land agent John Henry Blake and Blake's driver were ambushed and shot dead near Loughrea. The murders shocked Ireland and Britain alike. Yet even this did not alter the Marquess of Clanricarde's course. He publicly declared that intimidation would not work, and that if his agents were killed, he would simply appoint others. Safely removed in London, he continued to press for evictions, indifferent to the danger faced by those acting in his name. By the late 1880s, the Marquess of Clanricarde had become more than a local problem. He was a national embarrassment and a strategic liability for the British government. At a time when London was attempting to stabilise Ireland through land reform and limited concessions, he embodied the landlord system at its most extreme and indefensible. Every eviction strengthened nationalist arguments. Every confrontation handed the Land League a propaganda victory. Senior officials privately expressed disgust. Even Arthur Balfour, the British Chief Secretary for Ireland at the time, remembered for his hardline approach to law and order, found the Marquess of Clanricarde impossible to defend. The state was forced into the absurd position of deploying enormous resources to protect a landlord whose behaviour undermined its own political aims. The Marquess of Clanricarde was not preserving British authority in Ireland, he was actively corroding it. Ultimately, the government concluded that the situation could not continue. When the Marquess of Clanricarde refused to sell his estates under successive land acts, special measures were employed. The Congested Districts Board, empowered to deal with obstructive landlords, moved toward compulsory purchase. He fought the process bitterly, contesting valuations and delaying proceedings at every stage. But by 1915, his estates were finally taken out of his hands. The Marquess of Clanricarde died on April 10, 1916, just days before the Easter Rising erupted and transformed Ireland's political landscape forever. He left no heir, and his aristocratic titles died with him. His former tenants did not mourn his passing. The Marquess of Clanricarde is long remembered in Galway as a landlord obsessed with evictions regardless of the consequences. He inherited enormous wealth, authority, and power. Throughout his life, he chose rigidity over humanity, legalism over responsibility. In doing so, he hastened not only the destruction of his own estates, but the collapse of the entire landlord system in Ireland. He is remembered not for what he built, but for what he so stubbornly refused to understand. That land in Ireland could never be just property. If you found this story interesting, please give the video a like. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to subscribe for more Irish history brought to life every week.